Continue. Working with my colleagues at NEXTLAW, I've had the pleasure of connecting with Denton's clients around the world, and it is clear that our current context has been an accelerator for change in the legal department. Understanding how to optimize the delivery of legal services to the business through a combination of people, process, and technology is top of mind for many. Now, as one in-house counsel recently shared with us, now more than ever, we are going to have to manage doing more with less, and proper information flow and organization of work is going to be extremely important. So now looking ahead into 2021 can feel a bit daunting, but in today's session, we hope to alleviate some of that stress and offer some key themes and practical tips to ensure you are fully prepared and your team is equipped to handle whatever 2021 has in store for us all. I'm very pleased to join you today as moderator of this impressive panel of women legal leaders, whom it is my pleasure to introduce. Starting Katie Brennock, who's the GM Customer and Regulatory Partnerships at Airways New Zealand. Welcome, Katie. Thanks for joining us. Katie was also formerly General Counsel at Danone Australia and New Zealand. My partner at Denton's Kensington Swan, Katrina Van Hout. Welcome. Thanks again for joining us. Katrina was also previously in-house and was Senior Legal Counsel at Fletcher Building. And last but not least, my colleague and consultant for NEXTLAW In-House Solutions, Lucy Bastley. Hello, Lucy. Lucy was formerly Assistant General Counsel of Legal Operations and Contracting at Microsoft. So thanks very much, everyone, for joining us today. We are, before we get started, going to run a few polls. What would a Zoom call be, a Zoom webinar be without a polling session? Just wanted to get a sense from you all, your current situation. Let's just see our priorities here. All right, so beginning with the first question. Have you considered your priorities and objectives as a law department for 2021? This is a yes or no answer, if you don't mind responding and letting us know who you are in terms of your priorities. All right, we might be having, wow, we've got some interesting responses here. Now, if you've already answered yes and have considered your priorities, where does it lie? Team engagement and collaboration, looking at your teams. Are you looking at your law firms and relationships? Thinking about technology, looking at your risk, optimizing resources, looking at workflows coming into the department, and my favorite, which is reporting on metrics. So let's see where we are. We're going to end the polling very soon and share our results. It looks like we've had quite a few, half people have had a chance to vote. We'll just give it 2 more seconds here and then we'll close the voting out. 1 and 2. All right. Let's see, where do we stand? It looks like the majority of you have considered your priorities and objectives for 2021. So fantastic news. Hopefully our timing is right on to have these kinds of conversations. It looks like by far team engagement and collaboration is a #1 priority, which doesn't surprise me. We don't produce widgets in the legal team. We are people, and that's an important component of it. Also looking at resources and risk, and obviously law firm relationships as well. Well, that's fantastic. Thank you everyone for taking the time to share your views with us. So we will have some time at the end for questions, but I welcome you to use the chat feature or the Q&A function throughout, and we will make sure we leave some time for that before we close out here today. But I think I'd like to start just being a little cheeky if I can, and ask each of our panelists in maybe 1 word or a brief phrase to share with us what your predictions are for the law department of 2021 and beyond, and what does that look like, and maybe a brief explanation behind those predictions. Maybe Lucy, I can start with you.
Absolutely. If I have to just pick 1 prediction, this is very difficult. I mean, I would say that next year, law departments are going to find themselves engaging as teams in a different way, engaging as a community in a different way than they had in the past. Likely there will be more intentional, planned, I don't want to say more rigorous, but more organized approach to how managers meet with their direct reports, how cross-team meetings or issues are resolved just by virtue of the change in our work environment and the we have to be much more intentional now with how we engage with each other. And that's, you know, for better or for worse, that's the reality. So I think we're going to see a new ways of engaging next year.
Sounds like that's a common theme, certainly among the attendees as well. Katie, love to hear your thoughts. One word or phrase, what does next year look like?
A marathon, not a sprint. That would be my word. Sorry, that's 5 words or something. Look, I guess coming from my direct experience and sector, you know, 2020 has been a hugely challenging year. We had a 98% reduction in revenue. We went from having 26 passenger airlines to 1, our national carrier, you know, immediately when the pandemic started. And we've had to go through a significant cost exercise. And to your comment earlier, Joanne, you know, we have to do a lot more with less, and that's going to continue to be a theme. I think, though, you know, to sort of slightly pivot and be positive in terms of looking into 2021, you know, we have to completely pivot ourselves as a business and totally change our business model to be future fit for what the aviation sector is going to look like coming out the other side of the pandemic. And that's extremely exciting. You know, there's a lot of strategic work that the team's going to be really key in driving to make those changes. And in that context, I think the marathon, not the sprint, and well-being and engagement is really key. And I'm sure that will be true for a lot of my in-house colleagues.
Fantastic. Well said. Katrina, thoughts from your side?
Sure. So I think 2021, certainly in New Zealand, is still going to be characterised by some uncertainty and disruption, which could lead to businesses and legal functions needing to be ready to respond to the next crisis. But I do think that BAU projects, or nice to have projects that have been deferred for 2020, will probably come online again for 2021. And so in-house legal teams will need to be flexible to manage both the BAU projects that have been put on hold and also able to deal with any crisis or whatever 2021 throws at us. So it might be more challenging.
Well, that's great. Well, hopefully we'll provide everyone here today with some tips to help make it through that marathon, not a sprint. Although any idea of running at this moment doesn't entice me, but we'll get there. So I'd like to begin our conversation by talking about our people and our teams. I think that's clearly the #1 issue that's come clear today. And more than likely, members of your teams are going to be challenged with balancing personal obligations and work responsibilities with perhaps more immediate pragmatic concerns about job loss, and understandably front and center, of course, as people worry about business slowdowns and the impact on the legal departments. Now, Katie, in our planning discussions, and as you shared with us just now, there's no question you faced some incredible challenges over the past 9 months, and especially as you highlighted the challenges and revenue challenges in the aviation sector in particular. Yet despite this, as law department leader, you've significantly advanced the engagement of your legal team and are very aligned to the business. Can you share with us how did you do that?
Look, so when I joined, I had a sort of disparate group of teams, and engagement was, I think, the lowest in the business, if not close. I think something outrageous like 6%, and at the moment we're right up there at the top of the organisation, and really proud of that. And I think that's attributable to all of the people in the team. And what I mean by that is that, you know, we're really focused on having a high performing team, and what I would say a word in Māori is whanangatanga, being connected to one another. And that's outside of the work we do. So there's no doubt that we're all doing demanding jobs and that those demands are increasing, but we make sure we connect as people outside of that, and frankly have a laugh and support one another in our lives, not just in our work. And I think that really has a positive impact. I think the other thing I'd say is that, you know, we've all had to change the way that we work and live this year. And it's been an enormous amount of change in a very condensed period of time. And we've found ways to connect with one another effectively through this medium in all sorts of hilarious ways. But that has really helped, to be honest. And, I think the other thing I'd say is that actually reaching out and connecting to, as a leader, and taking on a lot of responsibility for the well-being of people in my team with my peers who have shared their own learnings and insights. I found that really a great source of support myself. I think the other thing too is that legal in particular, has had to manage through a lot of the challenging aspects of crises, but also, as I think you alluded to, Joanne, a lot of the pivoting. So for instance, our international business this year went completely online in a matter of weeks. You know, legal was really at the forefront of driving that key strategy. A lot of our transformation programs and some of the parts of our business that we're divesting, again, huge projects for legal, are really key to our strategy. So I think doing exciting, interesting, meaningful work is really important too. And I think too, some of the comments that Katrina made, finding ways to support the team through some of the less important work, i.e. not doing it, has been key to that too. So, you know, I think, you know, overall, you know, we've got new technology that supports us, that we've managed to drive through. And I think that people have see the value that legal are contributing to all of these things, and have, you know, managed to find money to support that, given the importance of it. So yeah, overall, really some really positive things that have come out of it. The old "don't waste a crisis" scenario has been really true this year.
Well, that's fantastic, Katie, and appreciate the point around initiative fatigue and really managing how many new initiatives, how many new things, how much change really that we all can cope with and deal with. But I really take your point around meaningful work, and Lucy, maybe I'll turn to you, because I think this leads to a really interesting point about looking at the type of work that our teams are doing. And are they practicing at the top of their license? Are they spending time, as Katie said, on work that they find fulfilling and rewarding? Or are they working on NDAs, which, as we know, are all great little snowflakes, and every one of them is unique and special? That is sarcasm. There's a good possibility, though, that we might not always be engaging our teams on the highest and best use. So what are your thoughts on how do we take a step back and start to look at the type of work that's being done, and whether or not there's opportunities to do that in a different way, whether that's a combination of process or maybe enabling technology? What are your thoughts for somebody who wants to just take a step back and look at that?
Right. So absolutely, the first things we have to understand and appreciate, it is so hard to take that step back. It is so hard to think and assess, right? And that overwhelming feeling often becomes paralyzing. You're like, I'm just going to keep going. Just the thought of stopping now means that I'm going to have this flood waiting for me, and you know, I can't afford to stop. So how do you balance, you know, the need to take a little bit of a broader view without that feeling of, in order to do that, I must stop. So we always say everybody's in time. We often use that as a way to make ourselves feel better of, okay, that's why things are a little bumpy on this flight, and that's okay. That's the reality. You can't move forward if you're waiting for that perfect time to stop and reassess. So I'm going to also jump on, you know, Katie's great quote of, you don't waste a crisis. It's true, right? It's not because you're being opportunistic. And you don't want to feel that way, certainly, especially not in a leadership position. But this is the right time to try to understand what is that work, and what is the, you know, what are people spending their time on? Only because you have the ultimate making their time more valuable, making their time feel productive, making them feel like the end of the day, which some of these days we know really going to change in the next even 6 months if we're just watching the news. So it's okay to appreciate and understand that things are changing from now forward, and there isn't going to be an end in point where things will go back to normal. So stepping a little bit back right now and just asking that question of yourselves, and being honest with yourself and saying, am I doing the best level, the highest level of work? Sometimes it's very personal to even say, this is what I want to do. You know, I was hired to do this exciting stuff. I was brought in because I'm so smart and capable and an opportunity, but here I am stuck doing this kind of recurring work. This is the time to speak up. This is the time to bring that to manager level, you know, your managers, if you're not in that position. And if you're a manager, this is the time to enable people to feel comfortable saying that, I'm not sure I'm spending my best time on what you want me to. I mean, it fosters such a healthy conversation. I think that's kind of the first thing to do without over engineering and creating big projects. You know, like we said, there's fatigue. Don't please let's not launch another project. If I have to go to another kickoff for something I may not even understand, I'm gonna scream. So how do you create that culture of openness and transparency where it's safe to talk about your workload? It's safe to say, by the way, I'm not sure I'm as busy as I should be. That, it's weird because given what's happening in the world, I feel like I should be busier, but it could be that somebody's sitting in an area of work that in fact has changed so much, but the new work isn't coming to that particular person. So how do you as a leader create that open and safe conversation to have that discussion at a meaningful level? So I think that's really the first step. I mean, I'm in the world of legal operations, right? I'm in the world of efficiencies, and people assume that means I'm in the world of technology. And yes, but first, are the people doing the best work they should be doing? Not their best work, right? That's a quality discussion, but are they doing the work that is the most valuable to the department and to the business? Because we know in-house, you're there to support the business. It is for the sake of being a lawyer and duke out the most complicated legal principles and issues with no impact, right? It's all connected to that business. So how to draw that connection between the business goals and the valuable work that the legal team should be doing, I think is a really healthy conversation. I wish people could start that in slow and steady, small steps, not a big, stop and assess. And then later we can definitely get into some of the more tactical things that you can do, but I'll pause there for a minute. It's a bit more of a philosophical answer for now.
That's great, Lucy. I was going to ask you to dive into one of the most common themes that we're seeing right now from law department leaders, which is if your team's not coming to you to suggest that they could be doing more work, how do you get greater insight into the type of work that they're doing? And one of the most common requests that we get is around workflow intake. Do you want to get into that here, or do you want to save that comment for?
No. I'm happy to. And then I'm actually going to probably pull in Katrina from kind of the, hey, what can law firms do to help, and what can in-house teams ask their law firms to do to help them get some of these insights? I'll save that, but that's fair warning. I think that's going to come next in a minute here. But I think when you're in-house, we do hear all the time from the general counsel or their deputies, perhaps in larger departments, definitely that feeling of I don't know. I don't have a good sense is working on. Everybody's busy. There's a sense of this overwhelming busyness, but it's very hard to point to the actual work. It's very easy also to fall into the trap of I don't want to ask. I don't want them to feel like I'm checking in on them. These are all professionals. These are experienced people. And that's a fine balance. But the reality is you're part of a business, right? To mention reference the comment we just made. You're part of a business. The C-suite, the CEO, to point to specifics. They're used to being pointing to data, to some objective. Use the word measures or data yet. That's again, we should get to that in a minute, because the concept seems so in contradiction with legal work, legal practice, legal advice. Those are oftentimes immediate reactions are felt hard to measure. But at the most minimal base, we should be able to provide some sort of reference to the C-suite, right, to the business leaders in the company of what's going on in the legal department. Think about the work areas that tend to be more of the recurring work. That doesn't mean it's boring. That doesn't mean it's not important, to be clear, but it tends to be more of the recurring work. There should be a way to quantify that for the other leaders around the company so they understand what the law department's spending their time on. And of course, for the general counsel to understand how their internal resources are being allocated. Simple example, my favorite one, it happens to be what I've spent way too many years doing, commercial transactions. Whatever flavor, whatever type, agreements, contracts, leases, is that makes sense in your industry. That is a bulk of work that we know a lot of law departments spend a lot of their time on. It's where legal departments have some basic data. How many things, fill in the blank of what that thing is for you, but how many are coming in? Can you categorize them maybe into a few key buckets, right? Maybe it's something like NDAs, we mentioned, is a great example, right? Non-disclosure agreements. Do we get a lot of those? Do we feel like there's a lot? Oftentimes, legal departments go on anecdote, right? We have a ton of contracts. So many times we have this issue we're negotiating, right? But that inability to quantify, it doesn't help create confidence in the business leadership, right? On the business side of the company, that the law department is operating at its highest efficiency level. So yes, we do hear a lot about that need for transparency. It's a good management question to ask, and there's nothing wrong with it. I think right now the legal profession is starting to realize that we're no longer excused from answering that question, or our answer of "it depends," it just isn't good enough anymore. And oftentimes that question comes up in the context of law firm engagements, which we'll get to later. But even on that more substantive kind of, what are we spending our time on? You know, Katrina, have you been hearing, or have in-house teams asked you, hey, favorite outside law firm, how many of these things have we sent to you? You know, I've noticed that law departments forget that they can ask their law firms to help them with that same struggle. Sometimes law firms know more about the in-house team in particular, you know, practice areas than they do. But I think that would be interesting. I mean, we see it from the part of Denton's that Joanne and I work with for sure, but I'd love to hear from a kind of a general law firm perspective. How would you advise in-house teams to approach, you know, their law firms maybe for insights?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Lucy. Interestingly, that question doesn't come up as often as I would expect it to, having sat on the in-house side of the fence. I've only got a handful of clients that will ask us for data on, you know, how much we've billed, again, across certain matters, what types of matters we've instructed on, to provide a full report of, you know, regularly updating where we're at. It's the bigger sort of larger corporates, NZX listed, or, you know, internationally owned clients that are asking for that sort of level of information to help them quantify the sorts of matters that they are referring to for external support. But yeah, I think you're right, Lucy. There's not much.
We didn't plan this question, but it's such a great, you know, your point, right, on not enough for asking. And I think what we're all in agreement of is that what we should ask, right? In-house teams should be able to have these open conversations with their law firms to help them gather insights. Would you agree? I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just want to make sure everybody knew this wasn't a planted question.
Yeah, no, I absolutely think so, because we've got, well, our billing systems and our document management systems are sometimes a bit more advanced than what you have access to internally. And so we can generally pull out that information pretty quickly.
Yeah, and then that's, Joanne, we get that, I know, question all the time, so.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you for asking that, Lucy. Katie, any sort of thoughts from your side in terms of the workflow and handling that and tracking, and just, again, just curious from your perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, when I started out working as a lawyer, you know, in-house was a much smaller portion of the profession than it is now. I think it's about 25%, give or take. And I know there's a lot of talk around the proliferation of, you know, alternative service providers, and, you know, the role that, you know, is the big law firm going to become obsolete? You know, you often see those kind of questions and articles, and it's a good question. Look, I'm a real believer in having strong relationships with your external law firms, because I think they're always going to be, at least for me, a key part of a successful in-house team. You know, I structure my team in a way that there are certain skill sets that we don't have, and for good reason. I mean, an example of that is resource management. I can't justify having someone full-time in that space sit in my team, but it's an expertise that we need regularly. And so, you know, we have someone who provides that from, you know, externally for us. But, you know, at the moment we're doing a big divestment, same thing. I'm not going to have an M&A team person on my team. Sadly, we have a lot of litigation at the moment. You know, again, we don't need to have that expertise in-house all the time, but it is a level of support that we need. I guess the other thing for me on the welfare theme, Joanne, is that I don't believe in flogging external lawyers. First of all, I was one for a long time. And like Katrina, I've been on both sides of the fence, and as I like to treat people respectfully. And I think that when you have a mutual relationship of respect with your external law firms, and they feel respected as a key part of your team, you know, an extension of it, that you get a better level of service. I mean, there are certain things I don't need quickly. I never ask for them quickly. There are times when I do. In the middle of lockdown 4, we had to go through a discovery process, which is quite challenging when all my team are in their individual homes. And, you know, we really leaned into our external lawyers to help us with that. And they did, because we don't do it all the time. And so you get that level of service, I think, when you have mutual respect and understanding. And you also get a deeper level of understanding and commitment to your own strategy as a company and as a leader. So I think that's probably me. Yeah. But yeah, certainly I'm also a massive fan of metrics, just for the record. That's how I demonstrate the value that my team has to the business. It's how I get more resource. You know, I've grown the legal team in the last year and a half, despite the challenges, by several heads. And I brought in some great new talent. Plug for my head of legal, Helen Dukas. She's awesome. She's not even listening either. Too busy working. I'm kidding. Brought some great new talent, and you know that's all been key as well. And you do that through having great metrics and demonstrating the work and value that your team has. So.
Well, that's
really
I want to circle back to that, because I, as Lucy was alluding to, and I am as well very much a fan of reporting on value, and whether that's a combination of metrics or anecdotal stories. I think there's a lot that that we can do to help communicate the contributions of the legal team. But Katrina, I just want to pop back to the conversation around law firm relationships. That was something that our team deans indicated that they're going to be looking at. And I anticipate that, quite frankly, many law department leaders might use the next few months to evaluate their relationships and really looking at how to derive that value. I had an interesting conversation with an in-house counsel recently that she shared that to her, value means more than just savings. It's not how going forward they're going to be measuring their law firm partnerships, using the word partnerships, not relationships, which I think is an important point. So just love to hear from you, and especially given your experience on both sides of the table, as you noted, are you seeing, what are you seeing at Dentons in New Zealand? Is this an increase of RFPs from clients? Are there specific themes or expectations? Do you want to highlight any of the things that you're seeing on your side of the table?
Yeah, thanks, Joanne. So I agree with your source there. The in-house clients are wanting to see more than just discounted hourly rates. It's no longer the case that value is demonstrated by saying, well, I secured X% discount on the rates, so therefore I'm achieving value. The concept of value has changed to mean more strategic value and, like you say, partnership. The challenge for us as external lawyers is that it's not always very clearly defined by the client what value is for them. And it's different for each client and can be different for different instructions for the same client, because those instructions will have varying degrees of strategic importance. It may be that they're wanting to outsource the churn work that they don't want their team doing in a cost-effective way to sort of some junior lawyers to just power through that work, or it may be that it's a really business critical project that they're looking for advice on that has future impact for, you know, making the boat go faster for their business. So I think the more that clients can do to articulate what they mean by value in the context of their RFP or the particular instruction, the better quality our responses will be to those requests. I think there's definitely a focus on reducing cost. And one thing that we would caution on is if you hold your external providers to a really regimented, narrow scope, just say, we only want an opinion from you on clause 8.2 and just tell us what those words mean. If you don't provide the context, it's really hard for us to provide the strategic value and to make sure that our advice links into your strategy. I definitely noticed that being on the external side of the fence now, because when you're in-house, you are living the contracts. Externally, we're just reviewing it. And it's really hard to, without any context and without some background, it's really hard to understand why it is that this particular question is important and why we're even heading down this path, because we don't really want to be giving you some advice, getting down a path and realizing actually your strategy was to do something different. So really encourage all in-house lawyers working with externals to just be really open about what it is that your business is wanting to do, what the strategic outcomes and objectives are that you want. And I don't think it's likely to cost you any more to provide us with this background information. Might even save money. So it really certainly makes our job easier if we understand where you're coming with something. I think that's all I've got.
Lucy, you're nodding pretty vigorously. Anything to add to that?
No, I mean, Katrina, it's so great to hear straight from you saying, please tell us more. I think, I kind of get to see it from on both sides, having been on both sides myself, and now kind of in a neutral role, and oftentimes the negotiator in many ways, or the translator. And I think you're hitting on something really important, right? There is this hunger and interest from the law firm side to really do what is best and most valuable for the client. From the in-house clients team, sometimes they forget to give you the big picture or the full. And it is, it can cause a little bit of a disconnect. And I think that depth of the relationship can conversations of what is the business goal? What are you in-house counsel trying to accomplish by seeking the legal advice from the outside counsel? But you're trying to accomplish something, for the business. So it's how do you create that nice continuum and flow of information back and forth, and that fluidity that goes with an open and trusted relationship where in-house teams don't have to worry about picking up the phone an extra time because it's going to cost them an extra something, right? And you're saying how it's not about pricing. It isn't, and it shouldn't be, to create that extra value. But how do you have that conversation and just be very open and transparent about it, where in-house teams can say, hey, I want to be able to call you and not feel like every time I do, I'm going to be charged, right? And how do law firms open that door and say, please call me. And when you do, don't worry, I'm not going to charge you every time you call me, right? It's sometimes these very basic conversations that I think there's just discomfort around, because we're all professionals. We're in a professional service industry. We don't want to often have, that conversation. But what I'm hearing loud and clear from both sides all the time is a desire to get to the exact same place, but for some reason the path has been a little bumpy for a while, and I think it's changing. I think it's on the cusp of changing.
We had a comment in the chat feature from someone indicating that the law firms or in-house teams providing context to law firms is just as relevant as internal stakeholders providing information to the legal team. And Katie, I don't know if you have any thoughts or comments that you wanted to add to just generally open collaboration with law firms, but it sounds like you're quite clear in terms of how you engage with them and your expectations there.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that comment. I just read it and smiled as well, Joanne. Look, for me, there are times when I'm using external lawyers where it's overflow work. It's because we don't have the capacity to do it. And, I think the important communication there is that it doesn't need to be gold plated. It might just need to be good enough. And there are times when you need really robust gold-plated advice because you need to manage a board or an executive team or sometimes even external stakeholders. So being clear and people understanding your business and what you need is essential in order to actually have what you get back fit for purpose. So, and I also think, just to Katrina's point, and I'm going to take this feedback on myself, is that, why not ask your external lawyers for feedback about how you're tracking in comparison to some of their other clients? Because who doesn't want to be a valued client? I remember years ago, we used to have some, when I was working in law firms, that we used to have some clients people avoided because they were either difficult or, you had the charge out rates were so low that you had to do a lot more work. So, you don't want to be that person, right? You want to be someone that people like working with and for. Yeah. Good reflection for me.
And I think before I launched NEXTLAW in-house, I was the head of the marketing department for Dentons Canada, which is where I'm based. For those of you who didn't notice the accent. And having seen my fair share of RFPs, I've certainly seen the way that has shifted over the past few years, and really looking at it as an opportunity to collaborate as a partnership as opposed to sort of a check the box exercise, which I think just opening the line to that communication is so incredibly important to making sure that everybody wins. Because at the end of the day, we're all here to serve the ultimate business client, your internal stakeholder. So how do we do that in the best way possible?
Yeah.
Lucy,
I was going to say, I think on that point, if I'm going to read your mind of where maybe you were heading, it's, there's this continuum of information that needs to flow, right? We know in-house teams are frustrated because they don't get enough information from their own internal business counterparts or clients or business partners, whatever, however you refer to them. there's this business need, and that doesn't often come clearly to the in-house legal team, never mind the next step, of course, to get it to an external law firm effectively. One thing we are seeing as a big trend, in-house teams right now, because of, I think, this lack of connectivity, lack of ease to find their client or their business counterpart in-house, we're seeing a lot of in-house teams looking at ways to create intake, right? Intake mechanisms. I don't want to say systems or tools necessarily, but oftentimes they're looking at some way to intake the work that will help expedite that constant search for information. I mean, we've all been there, right? When you're in-house, you're like, I don't even know what you need, or I need an amendment. Do you? For what? To what? Why? And kind of that series of 20 questions game starts, an email back and forth, or texting or chatting, or however it happens. And so that is another trend, definitely, kind of I would predict for the future, is that intake, in addition to being able to start tracking some of the volume of the work or the type of work. Together with that, you get an amazing benefit of, hey, can you, by the way, fill in some of this information before you come to the legal team? Basics. It's a fine balance, of course, between the, oh my God, if I could ask you every question in advance, I'd give you a scrolling list of questions that the business is going to just fall over. But balance that with, if you can give me these 5 nuggets of information, I'll be able to do my job more effectively and faster. And so that's another connected point, I think, into this theme that we're seeing for the need for insights of what the legal team is working on, coupled together really nicely with, hey, by the way, we can do our work way better if we're given the best information from the beginning. And what's beautiful is, of course, that can then be transferred to the external law firms as well. And now you're really all talking the exact same language, and there's no broken telephone. What the business asked for, what the in-house team kind of had to translate, and then what the law firm's working on. A win-win.
And having access to that data is key, obviously, to the reporting, which we talked about earlier. And we've got about at least half a dozen questions about metrics and KPIs, which we promised to get to. We're going to save the juiciest bits for the end. But before we jump into that, let's talk about risk management, because I think that's another area where GC's minds are going to be turning to. It's obviously something that was top of mind even pre-COVID, but certainly in this increasingly complex situation that we all find ourselves in, with processes that may not be working as well as they had before, and certainly the extra stress. I'd like to just hear from both Katie and Katrina in terms of what they anticipate being a priority from a risk management standpoint as you head into 2021. Maybe Katie, I can start with you.
Look, for me, risk management is really goes to METIS, and that is, of all the things that are going on, how do I keep across them? Sorry to segue into the topic du jour, but for me, actually metrics does that, because I've got a great team of people who are empowered to work on things directly, including with external lawyers and our internal stakeholders. And so being aligned with them on the areas that I would be likely to care and want to be kept across, which for me are predominantly in that litigation and IP space. And you're getting good metrics, so you can see what the trends are and what's happening is key. The second part for us is we are in a very highly regulated sector, and that is there's likely to be some big changes in our sector, would be my prediction for 2021. And keeping across that and influencing that is key. And that does require help from externals, but also being connected in with central government as well, so that we can be at the front of that, if not influencing it, but certainly understanding it. But also be, I think, the translator between the technical internally and our external stakeholders, and then back again. And I think there's a really valuable role that the team plays there. That's probably my key risks. I think, also just like everybody, I think that we can't do any of this with widgets, as you said, Joanne. It's people, and how do we make sure when those people are sitting in their Like me, if you can't hear him, the dog next to me making noise. It's the dog, not me. And other complexities that COVID and stresses that COVID is creating and will continue to create, I think. How do we make sure that we keep support our people and keep them well? And that's a key risk, people.
That's an excellent point. And to your earlier comment about data, it's the new gold or the new black, or we want to position that analogy. Katrina, the thoughts from your side, what are you seeing in terms of priority around risk management going into next year?
Just picking up on Katie's point about people, I definitely think those out of Auckland don't appreciate the stress that we were under in Auckland with lockdown 2, and then that particular Friday where we thought we might have lockdown 3. Certainly all of my team, there was an increased level of anxiety and quite a lot of panic on that Friday about the prospect of lockdown 3. So I think throughout next year, the anxiety around will we have another outbreak and another lockdown is going to be something we need to manage with our teams. And out of Auckland, they just don't even remember that we had a lockdown 2. So there's some differences there if you have teams across different parts of the country that people may react differently, and we all need to go a bit easy on everyone who is feeling that way. In terms of a business risk, we're seeing sort of murmurings of solvency risk being an issue with, as we all know, the government support is likely to dry up in sort of January, February, depending on the kind of support. And so that could mean that insolvencies that would have happened this year may be pushed into 2021. It's really important, I think, for businesses, and legal teams can have a role here in encouraging businesses to have a plan. It's not okay anymore to just be surprised and disappointed and angry if a key supplier goes into liquidation or receivership. You need to be forward planning, thinking, how will we source that, those services or that product alternatively in the event of solvency concerns. This year, there's been a lot of focus on supply chain disruption internationally and coming up with a different plan to diversify there, but possibly not enough attention has gone into, but what if our New Zealand-based supplier doesn't make it through?
Excellent points, Katrina, thank you. So we're about 15 minutes until the top of the hour. Let's dive into, I think, a subject that we can all relate to and share some passion for, which is around metrics. So why don't, and Katrina, I know you're gonna have some views on this as well, but why don't we start, Katie, with you, just in terms of, I see in the chat we have some Q&A around what are you measuring, why are you measuring it, and how are you measuring it? I think our experience, it can be a very slippery slope, and you might want to start tracking everything and all the time, and that can be someone's full-time job, and certainly starts to question around why you're doing it. But just love to hear from you, and then we'll just do a bit of a roundtable.
Yeah, sure. So I guess the first learning that I would share with anyone who's thinking about introducing metrics is it's really storytelling. So it can be whatever you want it to be, to tell the story that you want to tell to your internal stakeholders. And so I can certainly share with you what we do, but I think that's what's key. And so the data that you collect is one thing, but it's really translating it like you will do in your day jobs, in terms of influencing your stakeholders to the story that you need to tell. And by way of example, when we got a business case to launch to invest in cloud-based software for matter management and contract management, what the legal function really cared about was absolutely matter management, but what the business, the hook for the business was contract management, because we didn't have a contract management system. So, that was the way we told that story, not to say, you should be dishonest, but it's all about the storytelling. And in that sense, the metrics that we report on monthly to the business, at the moment, we have a kind of a headline, if you like, and that really just calls out some big headline things the team did. So whether they settled an arbitration, whether they commenced a renewal process for all of our insurance policies, which for us might, is a significant undertaking, whether it might have been partnering with one of the businesses that we have around a particular, significant strategic program of work or tender or whatever, whether it might be, some wins in managing our IP portfolio. We have a kind of headline of some key things that, the part of the business that worked on it with us would know, but the business as a whole wouldn't appreciate the enormity of that, because as you all know, we get a coverage across the business that other people don't enjoy. And then secondly, we have some pie charts, very simple, that really, first of all, go to the number of overall requests or piece of advice or assistance that our team provided. And there is real value in tracking that, because it's not around, we did 17 NDAs. There's that actually overall, we got 120 requests for help from the business this month. And we break them down very simplistically to, you know, this number, or 53% of them, if you like, might have been reviewing contracts. 37 of them, hopefully I get up to 100 here. 37 of them might have been around actually drafting contracts. And, you know, 10% of that might have been advisory work. It's quite crude, but it really is quite impactful. And then we also have a pie chart which breaks that down into the business units, so that we have a couple, as I'm sure you do, of particularly challenging internal stakeholders that are more demanding of our time, and actually showing how much of it they get overall is a very useful story that we want to tell. We also, in our case, demonstrate through our pie charts how much of the work we did internally versus how much has been done externally. And for one of our businesses, we show how much they pay for and how much they get in comparison, which again is a specific story that we want to tell. But you know, that's me. I would really encourage you, if you're thinking about using metrics, to use whichever ones are going to be useful for you, given where your function's at and the stakeholders you have and the story that you want to tell. Yeah.
I think that's absolutely brilliant. Music to our ears, Katie. It's exactly what we talk about. And I just, to pick up before I turn to others, that your comment about storytelling really resonates with me. I think that there's metrics are great and numbers are fantastic, but at the end of the day, what is the overarching narrative that you want to tell about your law department? And we actually worked on an interesting project helping an institution to build out an internal communication strategy for the law department. So we to, you know, help work with them to create some thought leadership. And it was all built based on these incredible stories and successes that the legal team had, but that needed to be communicated in a different way beyond just the leadership, but to the business. And it's so impactful to see the reward of that. We also did some personal branding workshops. So we had the functional narrative that the law department is telling at the top, and then everybody in the department could tell their story and the successes that they have and the contributions that they made, so that when they ran into the CEO in the elevator, they could, you know, talk about a success story. I do personal branding workshops, and I talk about having that kudos file, you know, folder, because we don't, although I do have one on my desk, you know, a file of all the great things that you've done as it relates to here and now, so that you can always point back to that when you have a chance to run into somebody in the business. So I can keep that forever.
I think pretty much, Joanne. I have to say, like, for me, I think lawyers are often very good at their jobs, but not very good at selling how good they are at their jobs to other people. And I think that, you know, it's amazing what doors open and what things happen when you start to realize that it's an important use of your time.
So 2 follow-up questions to that, and I throw it out to everybody. It's in the Q&A chat. What are your thoughts on recording time for in-house solicitors? And what systems are you using to track metrics? So just open that up. Lucy, I know you're passionate about the point on tracking time. Do you want to start on that one?
Sure. We've explored this extensively. So my time, I was in-house at Microsoft for 13 years, and the pendulum swung on opinion on this quite heavily. We never tracked time, but there were a couple of groups who tried it. The feedback was not positive. So I would say that if you're trying to figure out what people are spending their time on, rather than actually having them track time, because we all go back immediately to our law firm days, and most of us, you know, that wasn't our favorite part of the law firm job. So, you know, it's not as much about tracking time as it's understanding how you break down your time, right? What areas of work are you spending significant or perhaps disproportionate amount of time on, which will then help inform perhaps that the business isn't great at using your time or seeking your counsel in the areas they should, or vice versa. Maybe they're over relying on the legal department. So I think being able to explain all of that the first time you mention anything about tracking and the word time in the same sentence is super, super important. But I do firmly believe it's not about tracking time. It is about understanding how your time is spent. And that's a big difference, because tracking time implies that there is some relation to it. Something then needs to happen with this, time you've tracked. And I think it's all about really the messaging from the leadership on how this data is going to be used and for what purpose. But I would say you just don't have to go to that kind of detail. It's not about 6-minute increments, God bless, right? It's really about, hey, over the course of a work week, how would you break down the percentage of time you spend on exactly the categories Katie, I'm sorry, just described. Katie, you were saying, contract review, contract preparation, general legal advice. Fantastic. From that, you can extrapolate so much interesting content, right? As a leader, again, is the bulk of your very highly paid senior lawyers, if they're spending their time reviewing contracts, then who is spending time providing advice? Is the business actually not seeking enough advice, and they're using you more as, kind of a, more of an operational, process focused, kind of legal team. So yeah, time tracking is not, I would say, not optimal, but getting to that information is.
I agree with Lucy. I operate off a high trust model, and I think that asking people to track all their time generally from their perspective doesn't really align with that. So that would be me too. I think the thing I would say around how you record, you can get software, absolutely, and we have been lucky enough to do that. But I don't think it's a blocker to being able to actually record your metrics, and as Lucy's saying, in a way that allows you to own your narrative, like Joanna's saying. And so in that sense, I would really encourage, if you ask people in your team, if you get them to buy into the value of the narrative, and it's coming from you're all aligned that you want to collectively be able to promote and tell this narrative, promote yourselves as a team and tell this narrative internally, then it's around, what percentage of your time are you spending on those categories that Lucy alluded to? And if you've got that buy-in, if you can tell that story to your team, then I think you'll get a much more positive reaction, and it doesn't need to be about time recording at all. So that would be my big tip. And I think, not me, because it's not my forte, but certainly Helen, she put together pie charts, and it doesn't necessarily require you to have software to do that. Now, software will help you, but if you've got to start somewhere, a couple of basic pie charts, I say like I could do it, but I understand they're not too complex, can tell that story for you. So I'd really encourage you to think about that if being able to invest in dedicated software is outside of your budget at the moment in the current context.
And that's a big question, obviously, Joanne. It's running through the Q&A of what system do you use, Katie? What system do you use? So yeah, if you're welcome to share if you want to. We're obviously.
Oh yeah, sorry, it's not a secret. So at the moment we use LawView, and they have a bunch of different modules that you can use. I understand we use contract management and matter management, but to be honest, there's loads of different providers out there and systems, and also in terms of the dashboards that we put together, Helen has really built a lot of that herself, because she wants to tell a story that's dedicated to where we're at and where our internal stakeholders are at. And that's been something certainly that's been driven out of our team in terms of the buy-in, but also the actual putting together of it.
Yeah, and Katie, I would just add, Joanne and I get a lot of questions from a lot of in-house counsel about systems, and the first question is, what system can I get for this, for metrics, for dashboards, for tracking? Well, there's no easy answer. Number one, there are a lot of systems, and they're fit for purpose, and you have to really understand your goal and the problem you're trying to solve. So there's a journey to be had before you jump into technology. That's a general best practice for any tech implementation. But I would love to echo your point on, you don't need high fancy systems to just start. You just need to start, right? That is the hardest part. Starting is the hardest part. And you're 100% right that you can create some pretty fancy charts from good old spreadsheets, good old Microsoft Excel, if you've heard of those guys. Obviously, there's the Google Sheets version if you're in Google. I mean, it's quite simple if you could just start. So I love that you you mentioned that, because it's certainly our official advice is, you know, we just want you to start, and then let's figure out what the right technology is.
And I think just to circle back to the conversation with Katrina earlier around asking your law firms for support, I think that is really something that, you know, you should, you know, I suggest stepping forward and asking, and, you know, law firms to step forward as well and to offer. And, you know, that's part of what we do at NEXTLAW in-house, is to provide additional value to our clients in a different way. So Katrina, any sort of closing remarks on that in terms of how firms like Denton's can help support our clients in this respect?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like I mentioned earlier, we can help with pulling out whatever data that we hold of yours that you would find useful to have packaged or reported in a particular way. We can absolutely do that. It's a really, just picking up on what Katie said about engagement, I agree that it's sort of an engagement downer to be recording your time in 6-minute increments when you're in-house, but there's a balance, isn't there, between not knowing how you can demonstrate to the business how much time you're spending on a particular part of your work. Like I always remember, for my experiences, quite often there's 1 or 2 difficult internal clients who use an enormous amount of your time, and it may not be the best use of your time. So to be able to demonstrate that with some data, there sort of is no substitute for, at least at some level, recording how much time you spend out of your week working with them.
Thank you, Katrina. So I think before we wrap up, I want to thank you all so much for your time today and this morning. It's been a pleasure to connect with you. Thank you, Katie and Katrina and Lucy, of course, as well. Thank you. I think we have Sean from ILANZ, is that correct, on the line, who wanted to say perhaps a few closing words? Layla, I don't know if we can unmute her or. All right. Oh, there we go. Popping up shortly.
Oh, kia ora koutou.
Wonderful.
Kia ora koutou, thank you very much. Obviously, Sian Atkinson, I'm Senior Legal Advisor for Te Wānanga Aotearoa and an ILANZ committee member. So on behalf of ILANZ, we just want to thank you all so very much, and to our valued partner, Denton's Kensington Swan. So thank you all for your insights. Absolutely. Yeah, my list is so long, so I don't know where to start, but it's great to have a list. So thank you very much, and for giving up your time, which I'm sure is not easy in the current state. So yeah, on behalf of ILANZ, thank you again. Ngā mihi kia koutou.
Kia ora, Sian.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. Welcome any follow-up questions that you may have, but otherwise wish you all the best. Stay healthy and stay well.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.